Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that everything you worked for could suddenly disappear. Your contract could be in danger, your reputation could be damaged, your career could be thrown into uncertainty, and the country where you built your professional life could suddenly become a place where you are no longer welcome. Now imagine that all of this happens because of a few moments of arrogance, insults, provocation, and behavior that crosses the line between football rivalry and outright disrespect. That is the dramatic situation at the center of this story, and according to the claims made in this script, the consequences could be far bigger than anyone expected. The football world has always been full of rivalries, heated arguments, trash talk, celebrations, and emotional moments. That is part of what makes the sport so unpredictable and entertaining. Players compete under enormous pressure, fans become emotionally invested, and national pride can turn an ordinary match into something much bigger. But there is a point where competitive passion can allegedly turn into something more serious. This story claims that some Argentine players crossed that line and that their behavior has now created a controversy involving not only football clubs and supporters, but potentially the wider football establishment. At the center of the story is Jude Bellingham, the Real Madrid star and England international who is portrayed here as being furious about what happened. The script makes the extraordinary claim that Bellingham formally demanded that Argentine players be removed from English football. According to the narrative, he believed their behavior represented a serious insult to England and that players who live, work, and earn enormous salaries in the country should show basic respect toward the nation that provides them with those opportunities. That is an enormous allegation, and naturally it raises several questions. What exactly happened between the players? What did Bellingham supposedly say? Why does this story connect the controversy to British authorities? Could players actually face consequences for their behavior away from the pitch? And perhaps most importantly, could innocent Argentine footballers who had nothing to do with the controversy somehow become caught in the middle? The story begins with a tense semi-final match in which Bellingham was allegedly subjected to constant provocation. According to the script, Argentine players repeatedly used insults, trash talk, and cheap shots to get under his skin. The narrative describes Bellingham as becoming increasingly frustrated as the match continued, eventually reaching a point where he allegedly shoved an Argentine player out of frustration. In the world of football, emotional confrontations are hardly unusual, but the script presents this particular incident as the moment when the relationship between Bellingham and the Argentine players supposedly changed forever. Instead of treating the incident as another ordinary football argument, the story portrays it as the beginning of a much larger dispute. It suggests that Bellingham believed the players had gone beyond normal competitive banter and had deliberately tried to humiliate their opponents. The script repeatedly emphasizes the idea of respect, suggesting that regardless of how talented a player is, there should still be limits to what is acceptable on and off the pitch. The controversy allegedly became even more intense when Bellingham was asked about the incident during an interview with an American magazine. The interviewer reportedly asked whether he still held a grudge against the Argentine squad and whether he believed they deserved some form of heavy punishment. According to the script, Bellingham did not give the predictable public relations answer that many professional athletes might provide. Instead, the narrative portrays him as speaking much more directly. It claims that Bellingham acknowledged that grudges can be part of football, but argued that deliberately using insults and cheap shots to degrade other people is unacceptable. The story then takes this argument even further, claiming that Bellingham believed the behavior was not simply an insult toward individual players but an insult toward an entire nation. That distinction is extremely important to the narrative. Football is often described as a sport where emotions are intense but temporary. Players fight for 90 minutes, shake hands afterward, and move on. But the script argues that when national identity becomes involved, the consequences can become much more complicated. An insult directed at an opposing player can be forgotten. An insult interpreted as an attack on an entire country can create a much larger backlash. The story then presents one of its most dramatic moments. According to the script, Bellingham allegedly questioned why players who supposedly felt so superior continued to play in England. If they disliked the country and its people, why, the story claims, would they not simply return to Argentina and play in their own domestic competition? The implication was that some players were allegedly enjoying the financial rewards of English football while simultaneously showing disrespect toward the country that provided those opportunities. The interviewer then supposedly asked what kind of punishment should be imposed. This is where the script claims Bellingham delivered his strongest response. According to the narrative, he said that if the decision were entirely up to him, the contracts of the offending players would be cancelled immediately. That statement, as presented by the script, dramatically changes the conversation. Suddenly, the issue is no longer simply about an argument between footballers. The story begins discussing contracts, legal obligations, professional conduct, and the possibility of players losing their positions. It claims that some football contracts contain clauses concerning conduct, reputation, and respect, and suggests that violations could potentially have serious consequences. The script then argues that if a player violates such contractual conditions, a club might have legal grounds to terminate the agreement. It even claims that players could potentially be removed without receiving the massive financial compensation that would otherwise accompany the termination of a long-term contract. The story presents this as a major warning to footballers who believe that talent alone protects them from consequences. But the narrative also introduces another question: would clubs actually want to get rid of highly valuable players? Modern football is a business worth enormous amounts of money, and elite players can represent major financial investments. A club might spend tens or even hundreds of millions acquiring a player, pay a huge salary, and build marketing campaigns around that player's popularity. Losing such a player is therefore never a simple decision. According to the script, however, Bellingham's alleged response was that financial value should not automatically excuse unacceptable behavior. A talented player can still become a liability if their behavior repeatedly creates controversy. The story argues that clubs want players who can perform on the pitch while also representing the organization professionally away from it. This leads directly to another major name in the narrative, Enzo Fernández. The script claims that Fernández had been linked with a dream move to Real Madrid and that supporters had imagined him becoming part of one of the biggest clubs in world football. But the story claims that Bellingham supposedly dismissed that possibility because respect is allegedly considered one of Real Madrid's highest values. The narrative then connects Fernández to a previous controversy involving Eduardo Camavinga. According to the script, Bellingham supposedly believed that Fernández would need to issue a serious public apology and make significant changes to his behavior before an elite club would consider signing him. The language used in the original story is intentionally dramatic, portraying the situation as if Fernández had effectively closed the door on himself at the highest level of European football. The script then claims that the expected move to Real Madrid never happened. It goes even further, suggesting that other major European clubs were also unwilling to pursue the player. The story mentions clubs such as Bayern Munich and Barcelona and presents Fernández's situation as an example of how off-field controversy can potentially damage a player's transfer prospects. Whether or not those claims are accurate, the larger argument being made by the script is clear: reputation matters. Footballers are not judged exclusively by their goals, assists, tackles, or trophies. They are also public figures, and their behavior can affect teammates, clubs, sponsors, supporters, and even their future transfer opportunities. The story then returns to the broader dispute involving England and Argentina. It claims that Bellingham's alleged comments were not simply directed toward individual players but represented a larger demand for respect toward England. According to the narrative, he argued that Argentine players had benefited enormously from playing in the English football system and that they should therefore appreciate the country where they had built their careers. The script makes an additional argument that Argentina's football success has been helped by the opportunities available to its players in England. It suggests that some Argentine footballers developed their skills at the highest level because English clubs provided them with elite competition, professional facilities, high salaries, and international exposure. From that perspective, the narrative argues that disrespecting the country while benefiting from its football system is contradictory. The story then introduces another controversial element: the behavior of Argentine supporters. It claims that Argentine fans booed or disrespected the English national anthem during a major semi-final match. It further alleges that some supporters were seen disrespecting British flags in viral videos. The script argues that these incidents created the impression of hostility extending beyond the football pitch. The narrative then makes an even more dramatic claim, suggesting that the controversy had reached political circles in the United Kingdom. According to the script, pressure from the media was allegedly becoming so intense that British authorities were considering whether the work visas of Argentine footballers could be affected. This is presented as the ultimate threat. If players were unable to legally work in the United Kingdom, Premier League and lower league clubs could potentially face serious problems keeping them under contract. The story claims that clubs could be forced to terminate agreements if players no longer had permission to live and work in the country. The script then estimates that more than 20 Argentine players were playing across different levels of English football. It emphasizes that only a small number were supposedly connected to the controversy, while many others were simply professional footballers trying to build their careers. This creates one of the most important issues raised by the narrative: collective punishment. If several players are accused of bad behavior, should everyone from the same country face consequences? The story itself acknowledges that this could create serious collateral damage. Players who had nothing to do with the incident could potentially lose jobs, contracts, income, and opportunities because of actions committed by others. That possibility makes the situation even more complicated. Footballers are individuals, and nationality alone does not determine their behavior. There are Argentine players who are widely respected in England, just as there are players from many different countries who have experienced controversies during their careers. The story nevertheless uses the alleged incident to raise a broader question about professional responsibility. The narrative then brings up Cristian Romero at Tottenham as another example. It claims that Tottenham had supposedly begun considering his departure and suggests that hostility from English supporters could make life increasingly difficult for Argentine players. The script describes the possibility of players being booed in stadiums and facing intense public criticism whenever they appeared in England. It even goes as far as suggesting that security concerns could become serious enough for some players to require additional protection. This part of the story emphasizes how quickly a football controversy can potentially move beyond the pitch. Once supporters become emotionally involved, a player may no longer be dealing only with teammates and coaches but with an entire public audience. The story then takes an unexpected turn and moves from England to Mexico. The narrator begins comparing the alleged situation in England with experiences involving Argentine footballers in the Mexican League. The script makes clear that it is not claiming every Argentine player behaves badly. It acknowledges that there are many world-class professionals who are respected and admired. However, the narrative argues that there have also been cases where Argentine players allegedly left Mexican clubs under controversial circumstances or publicly complained about their treatment. These examples are then used to support the larger argument that foreign players should respect the clubs and countries that employ them. One of the names mentioned is Ángel Correa. The script portrays Correa as a major signing for Tigres who received an enormous salary and was treated extremely well by the club. It claims that Tigres continued supporting him even when his performances were not perfect. Later, according to the narrative, Correa received an offer from River Plate. The script describes that offer as financially weak and says it was rejected. It then claims that Correa went to the media and complained about the situation, allegedly revealing private information and referring to personal threats. The narrator uses this as an example of what it describes as a lack of professionalism. The story then moves to Fernando Gago. According to the narrative, Gago joined Chivas and was treated extremely well in Guadalajara. The script claims that he was involved in building a project at the club and publicly expressed commitment to the institution. However, when Boca Juniors allegedly offered him an opportunity, the story says he quickly abandoned the Mexican project. The script portrays the timing as particularly controversial, claiming that the departure came shortly after Gago had publicly promised loyalty to Chivas. It then claims that his experience at Boca Juniors ended badly, and that his reputation suffered as a result. Another example is Martín Anselmi. The narrative claims that Anselmi arrived at Cruz Azul and repeatedly sought better financial terms despite not having won major trophies with the club. According to the script, the club continued supporting him, but when Porto showed interest, he allegedly left without demonstrating sufficient loyalty. The story also claims that a financial dispute followed and that Cruz Azul was forced to pursue legal action. It then accuses Anselmi of later criticizing Mexico despite having benefited from the opportunities provided there. These examples are used to build a larger argument about loyalty in professional football. Players naturally have ambitions. They want to play for bigger clubs, earn more money, win trophies, and test themselves at the highest possible level. There is nothing unusual about wanting a better career. But the script argues that ambition should not mean abandoning professionalism. A player can want a transfer while still respecting the club that currently employs them. A footballer can negotiate for better wages without insulting the country where they work. And a manager can accept a better opportunity without publicly humiliating the organization that gave them their previous opportunity. That is the principle the narrator repeatedly emphasizes. The story then makes a broader comparison between Argentina and Mexico. It acknowledges that Argentina has historically been more successful than Mexico at the national team level, and says there is no serious debate about that superiority in international football. Argentina has won major tournaments and produced generations of legendary players. However, the script then argues that Mexico has advantages in areas such as infrastructure, economic opportunities, and the domestic football market. It suggests that Mexican clubs provide attractive salaries and opportunities to foreign footballers who may not receive comparable opportunities in their home countries. The narrator therefore argues that foreign players should recognize the contribution made by the countries where they work. If a club provides a player with a large salary, professional facilities, international exposure, and a platform to develop their career, the player should respond with professionalism and respect. The central message is not supposed to be a campaign against an entire nationality. At least according to the narrative, the criticism is directed toward behavior rather than ethnicity or nationality. The script repeatedly argues that the issue is respect, professionalism, and personal responsibility. That distinction is important because football is an international sport. Players move constantly between countries. Brazilian players work in England, Argentine players work in Mexico, Europeans play in South America, and footballers from Africa, Asia, and North America compete throughout Europe. The sport depends on this international movement. Because of that, the story argues that every player has a responsibility to respect the country that gives them an opportunity. A footballer's nationality should not determine how they are treated, but their behavior should matter. If someone repeatedly causes controversy, damages their club's reputation, or disrespects supporters, there can be professional consequences. The narrative then returns to the original controversy and argues that the situation is potentially bigger than one match. According to the story, the controversy has created a debate about whether footballers should face consequences for behavior connected to national rivalries. The script warns that if authorities were to take extreme action against players, the consequences could spread throughout the football industry. Clubs could lose important players, supporters could become more hostile, and innocent footballers could become victims of a controversy they never participated in. That is why the question of collective punishment becomes so important. If 7 players are allegedly involved in an incident, should 22 players lose their jobs? If fans behave badly, should footballers be punished? If one player makes a controversial statement, should an entire nationality be treated differently? The story does not provide a simple answer. Instead, it presents the argument that players should be held individually responsible for their own behavior. At the same time, it strongly emphasizes that professional footballers should understand the power and visibility that comes with representing major clubs. The script eventually introduces a community perspective through a woman called Mrs. Magda, described as the channel's beloved World Cup grandmother. The narrator says the team reached out to her to ask whether Argentine players in England should be removed from the league. Her response, according to the script, is more moderate than the most extreme position presented earlier. She does not believe that Argentine players should simply be kicked out of the league without consideration. Instead, she believes they should accept a moral responsibility to apologize publicly if they were involved in disrespectful behavior. That perspective introduces an important middle ground. The issue does not necessarily have to be about destroying careers or removing players from a country. Sometimes an apology can be enough to acknowledge that something went too far. A sincere apology can demonstrate maturity, responsibility, and respect without requiring the destruction of someone's professional future. The narrator then argues that this may be the real lesson behind the entire controversy. Footballers can make mistakes. They can lose their temper. They can say things they later regret. But the ability to recognize a mistake and apologize can be just as important as winning a trophy. Football is built around competition, but competition requires boundaries. Without those boundaries, rivalry becomes hatred, trash talk becomes personal abuse, and national pride becomes hostility toward entire groups of people. The story argues that nobody benefits when that happens. The narrative also emphasizes that footballers are role models. Millions of young fans watch them every week. Children imitate their celebrations, wear their shirts, follow their social media accounts, and dream about becoming professional players themselves. When elite athletes behave badly, their actions can influence supporters far beyond the stadium. That is why, according to the script, respect should come before trophies, salaries, and fame. A player may have incredible talent, score unforgettable goals, or win major championships, but none of those achievements automatically excuse unacceptable behavior. The story therefore returns to Jude Bellingham's alleged message: talent matters, but character matters too. A player who can perform at the highest level but repeatedly creates problems may eventually find that clubs become less willing to take the risk. The same principle applies to managers, clubs, and supporters. Everyone involved in football has a responsibility to keep rivalry within reasonable limits. Passion is part of the game, but hatred does not have to be. The script closes by suggesting that the controversy may only be beginning. It asks whether English authorities should actually take the drastic step of cancelling visas or whether such a response would go far beyond what is reasonable. It also asks whether Bellingham's alleged position is justified or exaggerated. Should players face serious professional consequences for disrespectful behavior? Should they simply apologize? Should clubs handle the issue internally? Or should authorities become involved at all? These questions are ultimately left to the audience. So now the decision goes to you. Do you believe footballers who disrespect the country where they work should face serious consequences? Do you think Argentine players involved in the controversy should publicly apologize? Or do you believe the situation has already gone too far and that football rivalries should remain on the pitch? There is also another question worth considering. Should players who had absolutely nothing to do with the controversy be affected because they share the same nationality? That could create an entirely different injustice. Professional footballers build their careers through years of training, sacrifice, and competition, and it would be extremely serious if innocent players lost their livelihoods because of the actions of someone else. At the same time, professional athletes cannot expect unlimited protection from the consequences of their own actions. When you play for a major club, you represent more than yourself. You represent your teammates, your club, your supporters, and often the country where you work. That is why respect remains the central issue in this entire story. It does not matter whether a player is Argentine, English, Mexican, Brazilian, Spanish, French, or from anywhere else. The same standard should apply to everyone: compete hard, play with passion, but understand where the line is. If this controversy teaches anything, it is that football can change incredibly quickly. One heated moment can become a viral clip. One controversial action can become a national debate. One statement can create headlines around the world. And when enormous money, famous clubs, national pride, and millions of supporters are involved, the consequences can become much larger than anyone initially expected. The final question is therefore simple: where should the line be drawn? Should England cancel the visas of Argentine players involved in the controversy? Should clubs terminate contracts? Should the players simply apologize and move forward? Or should the entire situation be treated as nothing more than another heated football rivalry? According to Mrs. Magda's perspective in the script, the answer may be somewhere in the middle. Do not necessarily destroy careers, but demand accountability. Do not punish innocent players, but expect those responsible to acknowledge their actions. And above all, remember that respect should always come before rivalry. Football is supposed to bring people together through competition, passion, and love for the game. Winning a trophy is temporary. A reputation can last for an entire career. And once respect is lost, rebuilding it can be much harder than winning any championship. So what do you think? Has this controversy crossed the line? Should the players involved apologize publicly? Should English clubs take action? Or is the entire situation being exaggerated? Share your opinion in the comments because this debate is far from over. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next major football story. The world of football is always full of surprises, controversies, rivalries, and unexpected twists, and this story may have only just begun.